So our next panel is the service provider panel, and moderating that panel is going to be the fabulous Lara Brooks, now of the Chicago Youth Storage Initiative.
I'd love to have my amazing panel come up now if you want. I want to just briefly introduce them. They're going to talk a little bit more about who they are and give you a snapshot of the programs that they're providing. We've got Flora from Unity Parenting and Counseling, Jeri from Teen Living Programs, Paul from the Night Ministry, and Angelique from AIDS Foundation of Chicago. And all of these programs really represent so many geographic areas of Chicago, so it's going to be an exciting conversation. I feel like they always put the social service providers at the end because we're just so, I don't know, yeah, so interesting and exciting. And so I feel like I've been taking a lot in from today's conversations, and so I just wanted to kind of bullet through a few things that I feel like have been really central themes before we launch into some questions as it relates to a really critical part of what we've been talking about today, which is the magic of innovative, thoughtful youth work. So the first thing I feel like that has really resonated has just been this idea that relationships are everything, and that when we're talking about placemaking, that the supportive services that these programs provide, it's like this magic spark that is so necessary to what makes programs work and work really well. The other thing I've heard is that holistic models are really important. Casey talked about holistic models of care, and I'm really excited to highlight these different programs today as folks who are really bringing together an array of services and options for young people to access in all of their different program sites, everything from basic needs to recreation, arts programming, educational and vocational work. They'll talk about that in a minute. The third thing that hasn't necessarily been named, but something that I'm hearing loud and clear is this idea around the values that we want to bring into a tiny homes model of care. And so thinking a lot about positive youth development, the idea that young people deserve freedom to have meaningful options and choices, that whole idea of like the 1+ really resonated with me around what positive youth development work can look like. Harm reduction, I feel like, has been a thread throughout a lot of the things that we're talking about, really meeting people where they're at. And then also this third piece around how to do this in a way that's trauma-informed has been something that's, I feel like, popped up throughout the day. So excited to explore what that looks like as it relates to thinking about how to implement a tiny homes model of care. The third thing is this really, like, how do we do this high-quality, long-term impact work? Katrina talked about quality supportive housing, and so I've been thinking a lot about how that's connected to the best possible tiny homes model of care that we can create. And then I've been thinking a lot about this broader marketplace idea. So I'm hoping that by the end of tomorrow, at least 10 of you will decide to move into tiny homes somewhere and start creating that market. And then a lot about in what ways potentially, and I was thinking about this related to some of the things that Christine was talking about, how can a tiny homes model of care enhance other housing models in Chicago? So how could we think about tiny homes as bringing some of our own housing programs currently to the next level? And I think that's really exciting to think about. So with that, I want to just jump into our panelists. We'll just start with Flora, and really just, you have 2 to 3 minutes to do a performative dance of all of your programs. So yeah, tell us who you are and a little bit about your program, and then kick the mic.
I usually can't even say hello in 3 minutes. And by the way, I just got my new lease, and it's $1,800. I would like a tiny home. This is a month. I'm Flora Koppel. I'm Executive Director of Unity Parenting and Counseling, and Unity is a multi-service agency that largely serves people on Chicago's South Side. We do have a foster care program, which is not directly relevant to today's discussion, but we have 8 programs that serve homeless, 6 of which serve homeless youth. We have a low-threshold overnight shelter. that serves 24 youth on Chicago's South Side. We have a locker project, Ujima, the locker project that opened 2 weeks ago, where we do provide, yay! Where we do provide lockers for youth, some of whom stay at the shelter, many of whom will not be staying. We're outreaching to the community, so it is not just our shelter, and that will form an engagement tool as well for homeless youth. We have 2 transitional housing programs for homeless youth, one which mostly serves homeless young parents, but we do take singles, we do take married couples, we take couples. And also we have one that serves young people that are homeless and living with HIV/AIDS. And then we do have a advocacy group called Orchids in the Hood that has been providing youth at many of the demonstrations throughout Chicago and throughout Springfield, and we're at the Springfield Mansion last week, in the governor's mansion. And so those are mostly what we do, and what our goal is to help youth at wherever they are at in trying to eventually move out of homelessness. And we'll talk a lot about what that takes. And we're trying to we have pretty much almost the whole continuum now, which is really helpful. And we do have youth that have moved from our shelter to our permanent housing program, which I forgot. We have a permanent housing program for youth who have disabilities. And we do have a youth that has moved from the shelter to that, and then youth that have moved to our other transitional housing programs. And we will talk more about that. But this is the first time I heard about tiny homes, because I don't watch that program on television, was from Tracy. So I've had to reformat some of my thinking to try to figure out how that does fit in with what we do and what we want to do and the resources that are needed. And I'll give this to Jeri.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Jeri Linas, and I'm the Executive Director of Teen Living Programs in Chicago. And we are an organization that has just celebrated its 40th birthday. Wow. Yay us. We've yet to have the midlife crisis. I think we have that every 6 months, so, you know. But the agency itself has been around, as I said, for 40 years and provides what I would call a continuum of care in terms of housing and supportive services for young people ranging in age from 14 to 24. So in terms of the programming that we have, we have, first of all and foremost, a street outreach program that actually goes out onto the street to meet young people where they might be. We then have a minor basic center that houses four young people, has the potential to house 4 young people every day, ages 14 to 17. We too have a transitional living program, which is 24 units in a building in Bronzeville, along with our Bronzeville Youth Shelter. And the young people who stay there can stay up to 18 months. The third part of our housing continuum is sort of second stage housing, semi-independent living. Young people, we have 10 apartments, and each of those young people, similar to our other programs, have case managers to support them through this process. That program lasts up to 2 years and is subsidized through the generosity of many people in this room, and specifically HUD. So one of the things that I think it's really important that is coming out of this discussion, and everything I learned about tiny homes I learned this morning, so thank you, Tracy. I have never seen the program. But I think what's really clear to me is that whatever these models look like, they have to be culturally competent for youth. And that's first and foremost. So, for example, Casey, who you all met earlier, talked a lot about not wanting curfew and wanting their own space, and I think that's very true. But all of us who provide this service need to provide supportive services to these young people, not just ending at 24, but in some cases going on until they're 27. And that frontal cortex is fully developed by 30, I think now. So I would just say that everything that we take into consideration in our conversation is the cultural competence that is really needed to support the physical building and also the sort of social and emotional needs of these young people.
Great, thank you, Jeri. I'm Paul Hamann. I'm president and CEO of the Night Ministry. Sometimes I wonder if that part of my brain has yet to actually fully develop. The Night Ministry, like Jeri, like Teen Living Programs, I don't know what was in the water 40 years ago, but is this year celebrating its 40th anniversary as well. Oh, good, no applause. That's what I don't. But we provide housing, healthcare, and human connection, not only for youth, but for adults. So we are not necessarily a youth serving agency. We're a homeless services provider that happens to have a niche in the area of youth housing. So on the adult side, we have a health outreach bus that's on the street 7 days a week. So there's about 50,000 contacts a year providing medical services to adults. And on the youth side, we have a total of 53 shelter beds that are open every night and available to young people, again, ages 14 to 24, depending on the program and depending on the young person's situation. So 24 of those beds are what we would refer to as interim or 120-day beds. I think the important thing to know about those beds are, amongst those beds are the only beds set aside in the city of Chicago for minor girls who are parenting and pregnant and not wards of the state. So if you're a young lady who is on the streets, you have a child, or you are pregnant and you're not a ward of the state, the night ministry is the only agency that has beds for you. We have 8 beds that are in transitional living program, and then 21 emergency overnight beds in our program that's that's called the Crib, that primarily serves LGBTQ population. And so we have a total of 4 different programs, but 3 different models that we work with. In addition, such as TLP, we also have a youth outreach program that's on the streets and starting to do a lot more outreach in areas in the Loop, as well as like in different libraries around the city. So, and I would echo what Jeri had to say too about the appropriateness of tiny homes for young people. I think so oftentimes we get into the situation where we think, oh, it's a great adult solution, so let's impose it, if you will, upon youth. And we have seen that on the national level with policy that doesn't work. I don't think the city of Chicago and our own continuum has yet to really fully grasp, understand youth homelessness and how adult models are not necessarily appropriate for young people. It's just not a matter in the size of their body. It's about development. So it's making sure we come up with whatever solution we do come up with that is age appropriate for young people and developmentally appropriate for them as well.
Hello, I'm Angelique Miller from the AIDS Foundation of Chicago. AIDS Foundation of Chicago is a nonprofit organization that works on advocacy, prevention, case management, housing, and capacity building with its service providers network. AFC does do some direct services, but mostly we work with our service providers in the communities that we serve, where clients that are homeless can receive services in the areas that they are comfortable with and where their services are located. AFC views its housing continuum as looking at it as emergency housing to more intensive supportive housing with intensive case management and intensive support services. So we administer funding through HOPWA, the Housing Opportunities for People with AIDS, emergency rent and utility assistance, as well as furnishing and other client support assistance. We have short-term housing and longer-term housing with varying levels of services attached, so maybe a Ryan White case manager or a housing navigator. And then we work with supportive housing, and we have about 500 units of supportive housing in the city of Chicago. We work with HUD SHP, so we have 2 large SHP grants, so HUD homeless housing, and then we have HOPWA housing. For our HOPWA housing, we work with clients for supportive housing, ex-offenders, mothers and families, and specific geographic areas like the Roseland community. In general, our HUD SHP units are scattered site. We do have some project-based units, and they are located throughout the city of Chicago with our partners. Last year, AFC began so the majority of our clients are actually older adults, so I think that this is a timely discussion for me because when we have our HUD homeless funding, most of the people served in our programs were older adults and are older adults. And we began to see where the groups were not being met and the youth, a subject of youth HIV positive came up in multiple instances. And so we've been working for the last year on building that program for youth that are HIV positive and either homeless or unstably housed. It's a small project. It's a small pilot project. And we feel that it's been really beneficial to have this as an option. The project is harm reduction and housing first. And we've been learning a lot from the youth that are in the program over the last year.
Thank you. So just to jump right into some of these questions, we've heard a lot today about just lots of ideas, but also from the presenters this morning about supportive services that they've already begun to layer into their existing programs or hope to layer in. What do you think are the most critically important support services that a tiny home's model of care model could and should look like?
So for our clients in supportive housing, we do, and it's a lot of services are client choice. So we do offer intensive case management, which is wraparound services. We offer education or employment referrals, and then wellness services. And so I think that when you work with the individuals that are coming into the project, really having them identify what areas would they like assistance with, and letting them have the opportunity to at any time receive services or stop receiving services, that it's based on their choice to receive those services, and really having non-traditional approaches to service engagement.
So I think before our previous speaker spoke about tiny homes as being a solution. And I think we need to, first of all, take a look at the individual young person and what does a solution to their homelessness mean for them? What does a successful transition for that young person to adulthood and to also independence look like for that young person? And being able to then develop the services around that, whatever that looks like for that young person. It's not just beams and bricks and mortar. It's about what are the things that in particular that particular young person needs to be able to successfully transition to adulthood and to independent living. So I think it's critically important that any services that are there are going to be able to be individualized. And I guess I would disagree a little bit, saying it's not necessarily a matter of choice. Sometimes there are certain critical services that have to be delivered. And also and where is this particular model going to fit for this young person's life? Is this the end-all be-all goal for them? Or is this a means to an end for them? So when it comes to being a solution, what does solution mean? And what kind of services are going to be tailored? If this is what the young person is aspiring to, is this tiny home, then let's develop services around making this into a permanent placement. But if it's going to be a step along the way, an aspirational step, a means of transition to something else, then let's make sure that those services are not only helping them meet their current needs, but also helping them meet their needs for the future so that they're able to emerge from the tiny home into something that's different, that might be more suitable for them.
I would agree with everything that's just been said, and I would just say that in our experience, and Casey talks a lot about this in her research, when young people transition from group living situation into independent or semi-independent living, there's a lot of desire on their part to be out of the drama of living collectively with 24 other people, right? And that's normal. However, when they get into those independent living programs, what we've found in our experience is certainly very true and similar to what Casey would talk to you about this morning, that there are, what happens is that what seems like independence and glad to be on their own can be also very isolating. And when they do slip, as all young people do, and they do lose a job or they do drop out of school, they definitely are, as Casey mentioned, they are embarrassed. that adds even further to the isolation. So that connectedness is really critical from my perspective. I think the other thing that sometimes becomes exacerbated is mental health issues, that while they're in the safe and stable housing of a transitional living program, while it's there, it's visible, it might be much more exacerbated when they live on their own. So I think this comprehensive independent planning that Paul's talking about is really about an individual plan for those young people. And so continued support around housing, continued support around education and employment, physical and mental health. And as we talked a lot about today, the continuity and connection to community.
Yeah, everything everybody else said, but I want to put some things in perspective. For those of you who have adolescent, young adult of your own, think about putting them out there and you don't ever see them again. So there's no support system, and you've raised them. They probably, maybe, were not trauma impacted, and you put them out there. How well would your 18-year-old do, and you never talk to them again? They have no support. So when you're thinking about this, aside from the trauma, which is very important, and we're not aside from that, we're talking about an 18 to 24-year-old going on their own for the first time, and then most of them without some of the backing you may have given your children, with some trauma that your children may not have had, but may not have had. And then we talk about permanent housing. I do not live where I lived when I was 20. How many of you do? So when you're talking about permanent housing for an 18, 19, or 20-year-old, you're talking about stable housing. This isn't where you expect they'll be in 10 years. This isn't where you hope they'll be in 10 years. You're looking at the transition from here to here to here. So I think it's really important, one, to put that in place. When I say that we need permanent housing, whether it's at CHA, whether it's in a tiny home, I don't expect the 19-year-old to be there in a few years. I expect this is one step along the way toward their independence. So then as far as services, they need everything, but some need something, some don't. Case management is key, obviously. Intensive case management is key because that's the guide. That's the one that kind of points them in directions. But mental health services, not for everybody, but for many. It could be as much of a range as you can get. We use theater. At one point, we had a play production in one of our transitional housing programs. And I had a young lady who could not stay in school, who wasn't a great actress, she will not be an actress, but came to every rehearsal and actually went and had a baby and wanted to get out of bed with the baby the next day to come to the performances. Mm-hmm. So I'm saying that to say what works for some doesn't work for everyone, and as much of a range of services, with intensive case management being key, that you can have, the better.
Thanks. I want to there's a great segue in terms of just talking about this continuum of care. A lot of the programs on the stage have their own organizational continuum or spectrum of services that young people move through. Do you, and I think some of the conversation has also been that a tiny homes model of care could be an interesting stepping stone between a transitional housing program and a scattered site apartment. And would love to just hear your reactions or thoughts on maybe how a tiny homes model could add an extra stepping stone in your continuums.
Sure. Well, I think like was mentioned earlier, if it's part of a model, I think we need as many options as possible. And Chicago's been very innovative in this in the last couple of years with our Plan 2.0, where we really took on youth homelessness as a priority area, and we were very clear that we wanted to see multiple ports of entry for young people. So we had a commitment from the city, and we were able to operationalize over 100 more beds, 114 more beds, emergency overnight, like the crib, like Unities. We were also able to expand geographically, drop in resource centers, one on the north side, one on the west side, one on the south side. Teen Living Programs opted for a program like that on Washington, on 55th in Indiana. And I say that because it's important that every young person has the port of entry that they need to get in the door, to connect whatever kind of services that they have. So I see the tiny homes model as another part of that continuum.
Yeah, options, because no two young people are alike. When I think about the potential implementation of this, whether it be at the Night Mist or any place else, the very name, these homes are tiny, and tiny things stick out. And so one of the things we know from our youth, from the programs that we've developed, is that they want to make sure that they're in neighborhoods that are gentrifying, places and a program or geographic building that's not going to stick out. So, and we know young people or adolescents have a really great sense of self-awareness about how they're interacting with their community and those who are around them. So, in order for this to be a successful part of any continuum within an agency or within the city, I think it's going to be really important to take a look at how these homes are marketed. If you're driving down the street and you know that homeless people live, or formerly homeless people, because once they're in the tiny homes, they're no longer homeless, are in tiny homes, you're going to see a tiny home and think, oh, that's where somebody who was formerly homeless lives, or maybe still identify them as being homeless. So for young people, that's not necessarily a great thing when they're trying to blend in and fit in with their community. So in order to be a part of any successful continuum, I think we have to take a look at how the tiny homes are going to be able to fit in while being tiny. And I think that's going to be marketing, that's going to be how it's rolled out, and how it's going to be made acceptable within a certain community. That makes sense.
Thank you. We've, I think, only got 5 minutes, right? So, 20, okay. Oh, really? Okay, great. I thought we had till 3:45 for some reason.
Just because you did a little break there.
Yeah.
I wanted to take just a second.
Absolutely.
To introduce somebody because she's on a tight schedule. Since you have 20 minutes left. One of the things that we know, everybody in this room knows, but not everybody else understands, is the interconnectedness of systems and the problem that most of the youth you deal with have with systems, whether that's the foster care system or the juvenile justice system. And we're really delighted that during the campaign, Kim Fox was really, really supportive of issues related to youth homelessness and talked about her own experience as a teenager. So I wanted to introduce Cook County State's Attorney, Democratic primary winner, Kim Fox. So having Kim Fox here and Sheriff Tom Dart and so many other people that need to be at the table to solve the system-wide issues that are interconnected with this. So thank you for taking that little break there.
So in terms of we've talked a little bit about some of the challenges and some of the barriers from a provider perspective already. Are there other ones that we want to lift up and add before we kind of talk about what best practice implementation could look like?
Oh, no, it's right here.
Oh, sorry.
It's back on.
Yeah, I was really interested in some of the conversations earlier about the integration across, the Texas programs and the great partnerships. And something Christine mentioned earlier about Chicago's capacity to address ending veterans' homelessness. One of the things I think is a great challenge for us as we approach what needs to happen around youth and ending youth homelessness by 2020 is looking at what's missing for us. And what was not missing for the veterans was data. Okay, there was lots of data. There were huge institutional partnerships between the Department of Veterans Affairs and our housing programs, et cetera. So some of those points that Christine made earlier, I think really start to identify. I would say that the single greatest challenge is account. And right now we're attempting to address that with the Voices of Youth Count across the country. That's being spearheaded by Chapin Hall here in Chicago. So I think as many of you in the room that are providers who are not necessarily youth providers but have access to youth, I think that that's critical. I think the second biggest challenge is the institutions, and that we need, for example, Chicago Public Schools identifying over 25,000 homeless youth, the 2,500 of them unaccompanied. We need them to be at the table giving us the data. We need Chicago community colleges, all of those external, the Chicago Police Department, DCFS, that's huge. And if we can get to those strategic partnerships to start addressing this, I think it'll take us a long way.
And I think underlying all of that is community determination. we all can get together for veterans because they served our country. But I know when we've tried to place programs for youth in communities, I don't hear the same determination. I hear they did it to themselves. They wonder their mom put them out, they got pregnant. They're gay, they're lesbian, no wonder their parents put them out. I hear a lot of things that are not showing the same community determination that you have for veterans, where you can wave flags. And I think to make all of the changes, systemic and otherwise, and get the resources you need the community to see it's important. And I think what I've been saying for 5 million years, and I've been around for 5 million years, is that if you want to end chronic homelessness, if we could start with effectively ending homelessness with 18 to 24-year-olds, you go a long way toward ending homelessness.
I think also with, and there's previous presenters up here, and they all, IDA and HUD and all of the different state and federal agencies, and it's a very complex structure to do housing in general, and a barrier that is in place is that it is a complex structure. Even within our continuum of care for homeless, the HOPWA program, the Housing Opportunities for People with AIDS, is not part of that continuum because, one, they don't just serve homeless. You can be at risk at homelessness, unstably housed, or living doubled up. And so when having all of these different entities come together, I think is still an issue, and it will be a barrier. With state service cuts that have been happening for homeless programs, we are continually, being expected to do more with less money, and so not only the financing and the funding for the tiny homes community, but also what about the service funding? What about the other services or ongoing maintenance and support that can be a challenge for providers as they look at this as a possibility?
And I know that one of the things that has come up a lot already today is really about this community relations piece and making sure that there's a lot of intentionality in building with surrounding communities and neighborhoods if you're going to drop a new housing program or even just support a housing program's ongoing success. And so Paul, I'm wondering if you could talk about just some of the lessons learned and challenges and opportunities as it relates to having a dedicated staff person who does community engagement work.
Right, thank you. So at the Night Ministry, we have 2 positions that are dedicated to community engagement. It's so important for us that we actually have a vice presidential level of strategic partnerships and community relations. Because you just can't drop into a neighborhood or drop into any location if you're already into an existing neighborhood and do programs for homeless youth or do programs for any type of social service program. So it's critically important to remember that it's going to take time, which is going to take money. It's going to take dedicated individuals. Also, I think it's, whatever path you clear to do this, that path is going to have obstacles thrown in front of it like you would not believe. We have opened up 3 different shelter programs. Each one has had horrible obstacles thrown in front of it. We're trying to get one open up now in North Lawndale that has hit a lot of obstacles as well, where there is. So I think it's having to have the staff members available or having resources available to go out and actually, we've got a lot of goodwill in this city, but do we have the political goodwill? And we need to make sure we develop that at all different levels of government when trying to open up a program like this. So, and then not only is it, okay, great, we finally made it through the plan development process or the zoning board of appeals process, all of which, by the way, will suck the ever-living life out of you if you let them, not once, but 2 or 3 times. But then it's got to be continual community engagement. Just because the door is open and the young person has their key to a little tiny home, that's when the community engagement actually starts. Because now you've got somebody who's going to actually be interacting with the engagement, with the community that you've been building relationships around, and that's going to take that whole set of relationship building to a different level. It's one thing to see a house go up, but when you actually got people living there, it is a whole different situation. So you may have some people who were supportive of the project when it started, or it's exciting to see the tiny home go up, but now you've got somebody living there. who has to interact with neighbors and hopefully is interacting with them in a positive way. It just requires a different set of skills. So we've oftentimes talked internally about having one person who is there for the community development process and one person who's there for the continued community engagement and relationship building part. It has got to be forefront in the mind every single program decision that's made. We've gone back and we've had to re-examine our programs and how we operate them based on neighborhood feedback, some of which I admit is from way out in left field, others which is really very legitimate. So I always tell folks that what you open up with on the first day is not what you'll end up with on day 60 or 6 months later or a year later. It's got to be willing to be fluid because you're in a living, breathing neighborhood that has living, breathing people. Sometimes they're cranky, sometimes they're not, but have to be able to kind of have the back and forth with them and be willing to change programmatically, still keeping to the core of what you want to do, but making sure that what you're doing and how it's being exhibited externally is compatible with the neighborhood. Because the obstacles are many and they will continue to be there no matter how long you're there.
Thank you. In terms of, we've talked a lot about some of the zoning barriers and challenges, and also the need for the critical need for bringing on a mission-driven developer. And I'm really hoping that maybe 2 people will leave today and commit to becoming a mission-driven developer, because I feel like we need more developers who are interested in supporting really innovative housing projects like this. But besides, those 2 big things, which have been a big focus of today's conversation, what do you feel like are additional just best practice implementation needs if a housing model like this is to be rolled out? You've got 2 minutes.
I don't have a solution.
Solve all the problems.
I think one is assessing who should be where and making sure that the right people, again, as I think Christine talked about, really as we look at making a decision about who this is right for and who this is not right for. Because as someone said before, if you pick the wrong one and you fail miserably, you don't always get second chances. Probably not only in Chicago, but definitely in Chicago. So I think one of the things is really assessing who this would work for, and then what supports need to be in place and what doesn't need to be in place for those people, so we get our one chance and succeed. Anything else? Ms. Pratt?
I think it's also important to define from the onset what success is going to look like. And how are we going to learn from our implementation? How are we going to engage in continual programmatic improvement based on what we learn once the situation goes live? What are we going to learn during the implementation process so that the next time we go to implement, we can do an even better job of it? So a process evaluation. But I think to be able to state clearly from the onset what your goals are in doing this is one best practice. And then, what are those indicators going to be of success? And if we don't hit those indicators, understand it's nobody's fault. But, were the indicators the right ones? Did we have the right people in place and the right amount of resources? So I think, as best practices go, it's not only on the programmatic side, but be willing to, from a performance measurement perspective, be able to continue to engage in this dialogue internally within your organization about success and what it looks like and what are we going to do if we don't necessarily, quote unquote, achieve success.
I think also when we were starting our youth project, it's a scattered site, and we looked at the model and what we thought, the traditional way that AFC puts together its partnerships, and we worked with our provider to talk really about what their expectations were, what our expectations were, and then also what was the expectation of the youth that they were serving. And we had talked earlier, Christine and Flora had mentioned that whole piece about appropriate housing, and so at the onset, we really looked away from the model that ASC had typically done, where we put somebody in a scattered site housing unit. That's the majority of our programming, and instead really looked at our provider and this idea of moving on from their transitional housing program because they had gone through the experience of living in a community, had life skills and working with life skills, a counselor and case management, and having this be like a second step for them in terms of their housing. And so it's been successful so far, but it is very small project because we were able to really go back and forth with the service provider, but also really engage the youth that were living in the program or were about to enter the program, that what would work for them, what wouldn't work for them. And we honestly had people that said, this is not, I'm not ready for this yet. And then, and so we weren't moving forward with something based on what we believed was best for them. And so definitely that engagement of our youth is key, and then the service provider community.
Thank you. And then I think, in terms of, we'll just do one last question. And this is more just, you don't necessarily have to speak for your actual program, but in general, what do you think? We heard from one of the panels previously about, what organization is going to step up to make this happen and roll this out. And, from a housing provider, youth provider perspective, what resources and time and capacity would you need to roll this out? Besides developers and a zoning lawyer, and what are those? What would you need to make this a reality? I mean, because the other question I have too.
Do you want? Okay, so I'm kind of breathing heavily here because we have to make sure this is not just about the organization. This is also about a system. So we need to make sure we have federal policy and local policy that is adaptable to the needs of young people. We also need to make sure, and I'm saying this with all due respect to those who are in the room involved with the continuum, we need to make sure we have a continuum on the local level that is open to the needs of the young people and how young people's needs are different and how those different needs impact the system as it's rolled out from top to bottom. So it's not just a matter of money, which of course it is, because we all need the money and the resources and the attorneys and that type of thing, but they're also, I think, at the same point, in order to make this, or any type of change with regard to homeless youth highly successful, we've got to have a change of mind about expectations and about the way that we go about interacting with each other when it comes to the topic of youth homelessness.
Great. I mean, I think the other piece too is if you have thoughts on whether or not you think a model like this should be piloted or rolled out outside of the housing social service model. Like it could be a community-based or faith-based driven model that doesn't even tap into HUD funding or other housing funding. Do you have thoughts on that, or?
Well, I think some of the folks that talked this morning showed alternatives, which is awesome, and I think that typical service providers in the room probably think, oh my God, there's no way I can take on one more thing, right? But I do think that we can support it. We can certainly, I think, bring the voice of youth to the table and youth workers to the table to inform it. But yeah, I think we saw some fabulous, innovative ideas this morning, and that was really helpful. Why not?
Yeah, I would just say, I think whoever initiates it, it is a collaboration. I think one really good thing that has happened, I believe has happened in Chicago, and I haven't lived anywhere else in a long time, is that we actually do collaborate as social service agencies. We try to bring in youth. We try to bring in churches if they join, a whole range of the community to say this isn't just about one agency. This is about what works. And every agency doesn't want to do everything, but who does what, who should do what, who isn't doing anything, how do we get it done? So whoever initiates it, whether it's church-based or whatever, I think it needs to be part of a collaboration, because none of us are trying to actually just go our own way, even though obviously we're responsible for our agencies.
Thank you. So I think do we have time for one question, or are we wrapping? Okay, we're wrapping. Thank you so much for your time.